How's it going, Yankee fans? Welcome back to Fireside Yankees with your boys, Alex and Ryan. So, today we're talking about a report that came out from Andy Martino of SNY. Not the Juan Soto news, but the fact the Yankees are looking to trade both Kyle Higashioka and Ben Rortvedt, and the Yankees are open for business on those two players. Now, we're going to discuss this, what the future looks like. You know, we've talked a lot about Austin Wells. You guys know a lot about him at this point because we've broken down every single metric that he has, why we think there's a lot of optimism there, why we think he ends up being the starting catcher in the future, and why, his blend with Jose Trevino is a really good kind of mesh here. I think that Trevino being that defense first catcher that can really be the personal option for Garrett Cole, and then Austin Wells being that lefty upside offensive catcher that has displayed some really good defense. I think right now, this is a good position for the Yankees to be in at the catcher position. And ultimately, Kyle Higashioka is 33 years old. He's heading into the last year of arbitration. There is reason to believe that we might be able to get a little bit of value out of him if we are able to trade him. He could be a starter for some other teams. And Ben Rortvedt, definitely a decent lefty catcher, more of a defense first guy. Still hasn't really developed his offensive identity, but another team willing to continue his development. I think he's only 25 years old or so. There's upside there. There's definitely something to untap if another team is willing to give him the opportunity. But Ryan, what are your thoughts right now? Kyle Higashioka, Ben Rortvedt. I think we both agreed a couple weeks ago that they were going to try and trade these two guys. It made sense given the amount of depth they had at the position. But I think now it's kind of coming around that it's more of a when, if not if. And what do you think that we can get in return for these guys?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, Kyle Higashioka has consistently just been solid, right? I feel like there is a lot of animosity towards Higashioka as a catcher, and he's useless, or the Yankees should have cut him, or the Yankees should have DFA'd him. And not to say that Kyle Higashioka is the future, or Kyle Higashioka is some star-studded catcher, but if you look at all catchers since 2022, he ranks 14th in FWAR. So, whether that means he's a top 14 catcher or not, I'm not saying he is, but in terms of player value, you've gotten the 14th most catcher value from any out of all catchers in Major League Baseball over that 2-year stretch. And again, look, he is a backup catcher who at times was asked to be the starter because of injuries or other situations. It's hard to really say that he wasn't a good backup catcher. He was, I think, excellent at what he did. But as you mentioned, I think he could start somewhere. He has a WRC plus of 85 over that stretch. That's right around the league average for catchers. Defensively, he's one of the best defensive catchers in baseball. He struggles with throwing at times, but in terms of framing, he is excellent. A lot of pitchers have had, good things to say about him. Obviously, you think of the two major accolades and the notches under his belt. He caught a no-hitter for Corey Kluber back in 2021, caught a perfect game with Domingo Germán back in 2023, or not back in, it was really this year. But, looking at the combination that works best for the Yankees, it's hard to argue it isn't Austin Wells and Jose Trevino, which obviously that makes it hard for Kyle Higashioka and Ben Rortvedt to find playing time, and Ben Rortvedt doesn't have options, and you don't want to carry three catchers, and the same goes true for Higashioka. So, I do think Rortvedt or Higashioka can net you something. I'm not exactly sure what that package looks like. But again, to kind of just reiterate the point about the fact that Trevino and Wells should be the duo, Jose Trevino, despite the fact that he suffered a season-ending wrist surgery last year, had plus 28 defensive runs saved, plus 26.3 framing runs, and plus 42 defensive value on the Fangraphs. That ranks as first among catchers. So despite the injuries, despite all the issues he's had staying on the field the last season, he's been able to give the best defensive value out of any catcher since becoming a Yankee, and he also has an 842 OPS versus left-handed pitching. If you look at Austin Wells, with the Yankees in his short sample size, he had an 811 OPS against right-handed pitching with a 392 expected weighted on base average. Obviously, the framing's pretty good for Wells, but the blocking and throwing have to get a little bit better. But the big thing here is I think the Yankees are going to get the best defensive and offensive value combined from Trevino and Wells versus with Rortvedt or Higashioka. And as you mentioned, Wells looks like the guy who's going to be the catcher of the future. Instead of looking at it from the perspective of, Higashioka's the veteran, Higashioka's done it for a little bit longer. Or, Rortvedt, he came up first or whatever it may be. The New York Yankees have to be a little bit aggressive in terms of their prospect usage. The most talented guy in that group is Austin Wells. The guy who you imagine is the best defensive player of that group is Jose Trevino. And if you think about Austin Wells' development, if you think about the guys that, historically speaking, the pitchers have had the most comfort with, and the guy who's the best hitter in this group, you go Wells and Trevino, and I don't think it's close.
Of course, yeah. I mean, look, the truth is that the Yankees now have a nice blend of offensive upside and just elite defense at the catcher position, and you can play those splits, right? You can play those right-handed batters, those left-handed batters, and left-handed pitchers, whatever, and maximize this potential here. Those guys are both very good, and they won't skip a beat if they're kind of switching them off based on the matchup. So I do feel as though they have a pretty good equation that they're going to implement. Now, when it comes to Higashioka, I'm hoping to get maybe like a bullpen arm in return or like a low-level prospect. I don't think you're going to get much for him. What do you think the most... Look, like you said, he kind of has some decent metrics. Like he has some decent upside. What position would you be looking to address if you're like the Yankees looking to another team and saying, Kyle Higashioka could start for you? He's in arbitration. He's cheap. He's, decent defensive catcher. He's, been about 87, 85 WRC plus year in and year out, 3 consecutive years with 10 home runs, which is certainly valuable to some teams. What would you be looking for in return in terms of positional?
Yeah, so I think the easiest way to get value is in the bullpen, right? And look, the Yankees obviously are very good in terms of relief pitching. They quietly had one of the best ERAs, if not the best ERA out of their bullpen last season, and have historically speaking, even going back to like 2015 and 2016, have just always ran out good bullpens. But the Yankees actually lack left-handed relievers. With Wandy Peralta hitting free agency, they currently do not have a guy on their active roster under control who's left-handed and is likely to make the roster. Now, you could argue Nick Ramirez, but Nick Ramirez actually performs a lot worse versus lefties than he does against righties. Matt Crook is technically an option, but he hasn't really performed at the major league level. And they do have guys who are right-handed and perform well against lefties, don't get me wrong, but it is nice to have at least one lefty in there, at least somebody that you can throw in any situation against the southpaw. And look, I'm not saying that they're going to find the best left-handed reliever on planet Earth for Kyle Higashioka, but getting a guy who's solid to okay or has upside is certainly possible. I mean, talking about Wandy Peralta, they got him for a declining Mike Tauchman, a Mike Tauchman that ended up going to play international baseball before coming back to the Chicago Cubs and actually putting up a pretty decent year. But the Giants left him off the postseason roster when they acquired him, and Wandy Peralta has become one of the most important relievers in this bullpen over the last 2.5 years. So, ultimately, can the Yankees, let's say, look at Ben Wortfen or look at Kyle Higashioka and say, there's a team out there that likely needs catching and maybe has a left-handed reliever who, maybe has solid stuff or, the Yankees could get a little bit more out of, and hope that value nets itself for the Yankees. Obviously, the Miami Marlins are a team that you kind of think of when you think of catching, and I think Kyle Higashioka would be a perfect fit there. He's an excellent catcher. He's a veteran guy. He could work with that young pitching staff, and they have 4 left-handed relievers currently in their bullpen. Now, I don't think you're going to get an AJ Puk or a Tanner Scott or, any of those elite level arms, who maybe you could take a flower on a guy like Steven Okert, who he really slumped in the second half. He really struggled with his ERA and really quality of contact as a whole, but his strikeouts are good. His stuff is excellent. Could that be a guy the Yankees look at and say, hey, we can get a little bit more out of this guy, and, making a flip there would make a lot of sense? Who knows? But ultimately, the big thing for me is I think you're just looking at Higashioka and saying, if you can clear the salary, you're happy, right? Even if it's just like a low-level minor leaguer, you're happy. In Ben Wortfen's case, I'm not sure what that value looks like because, we could sit here and say, like, yeah, he has upside, but he also barely plays, right? Like, he also has had a myriad of really, really just not great, injuries. And look, I'm not saying this to say that no one would want Ben Wortfen, but I am saying this to say you should probably temper your expectations on what a return's going to look like. That doesn't mean it's not worth it for the Yankees, who need to clear those roster spots, and anything you can get for these guys would be awesome. But it is still worth noting that Higashioka only has 1 year left in his deal, so that return's automatically going to be pretty limited, and Ben Wortfen hasn't stayed healthy nor proven himself to be a major league caliber hitter yet, right? Like, we could say catchers don't have to hit, but there's a certain extent in which that's true, right? You can't put up a 40 WRC plus or a 30 WRC plus and expect to get everyday playing time. If he pushes that closer to 70 or 80, that's fine, but I don't know. Like, I don't know if the value for Wortfen's necessarily going to be too high.
Yeah, I mean, we're going to see. Obviously, this is a long offseason. Free agency hasn't even started yet, but, this is one of the few positions the Giants actually, or rather the Yankees actually have depth at. And, they're playing from a position of strength when it comes to catcher. So we'll see how they operate. We'll see what they're looking for. But, the rumors are starting to heat up. And I love, Ryan, I love it when, like, different reporters come out and say the exact opposite thing. Like Andy Martino came out and said, the Yankees had preliminary conversations about Juan Soto. Just, one conversation, got quiet from there. And then the next day, John Heyman came out and said that they didn't have any conversations. So it's kind of like a battle of the sources. Obviously, I'm hoping the Yankees did inquire about Juan Soto and see what was going on there. So, definitely something to keep an eye on. We'll keep you guys updated on all that. Obviously, if you did not watch the breakdown that Ryan posted before this, earlier this morning, definitely go check that out. It's a really good in-depth breakdown about why the Padres could end up trading Soto and why the Yankees have the ammo to get it done. Now, some people don't want Soto, and they cite the reasons of, those big contracts have bit the Yankees in the butt. Well, none of these contracts have been for 25-year-old superstar lefty hitters that have played every single game for the most part over the last 5 years. So, when you think about that, the durability, the upside there, and the youth, this is not the same, $200-300 million contract the Yankees have given out over the last couple of years. This is an entirely different ball game in terms of caliber of player. And look, Judge is amazing, but he's 30 years old. He's going to be 31. Soto is 25 years old. Also, guys, we have prospects like Austin Wells about to take over full-time jobs for the first time in their careers that are 24, 25 years old. Juan Soto has been elite for 5 years. Like, there's not even a conversation. This is not the same thing. So, Ryan does a really good job breaking that down. So make sure to go watch that video if you want a little bit more information on that, possibility. But guys, always happy to hear perspectives, what you think that we can get in return for Kyle Higashioka, Ben Wortvet. Always happy to hear your thoughts down below in the YouTube comments. Make sure to smash that like button, like and subscribe. And I'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Yankees episode.